Hey, good morning, everybody, and welcome to Talking Niagara this morning with myself, Peter, and with Dave here. Hi, Dave. How are you doing?
Hello, Peter. Happy April 16th.
Yep, yep. So, welcome to the show. It's April 16th this morning. That would be Wednesday, wouldn't it? Yeah. Okay. Well, there we go. And actually, we're in Easter week, so actually, this is actually second last day of the week, isn't it?
Yeah, it's second last week of April. In We have a convention. Kiwanis has a convention in town here at the end of May. That's the one for the Eastern Canada and Caribbean district of Kiwanis, one of the most, probably the most diverse uh, districts of any of,
Here in Niagara Falls.
yeah, here in Niagara
Wow.
Falls.
Wow. Well, I wish that I'd welcome. When is it this weekend?
No, in the end of May.
In the end of May.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, remind us at the time. We should.
Oh, 5 weeks away.
Yeah. So there's no excuse for you guys not to be there. But big thing for everybody else to get here, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And Dave's going to be leading the tours around the falls. Yeah.
Yeah. Provided they realize that a gratuity is indeed appropriate.
Oh well. I'm sure they know the spirit of donation. I'm sure they know the spirit of donation.
That's right. The Dave Wheeler Fund for the benefit of Dave Wheeler.
You say that as if you're probably the most altruistic person I know.
Oh, there are so many altruistic persons. I wouldn't say that. I just do my part. There are so many people, we don't even see them. Basically, when I got the award, the award in 2022 for volunteer award at that ceremony they had at Fireman's Park there.
Yeah,
I felt rather humble. I was very happy that I got it. I was nominated by the people of the soup kitchen, but I was very pleased to get it. But I also made it clear to my membership that I was kind of accepting it on behalf of all of them, because many of them have worked in the community for, well, our more senior member over 50 years, and a couple others that were 40 and 30 years that have given their times and efforts always behind the scenes, basically.
Yeah. Well, that actually is the spirit, of course, about service clubs, right? You generally are not up there in the public eye.
No, you're not. And I happen to be in the public eye quite often because I was, when giving away donations, I was the guy that was retired. I was the guy that got my picture taken, sometimes only with me as a member of Kiwanis. I tried to take other Kiwanians with me if they were available, but so I got exposure, and I think basically being the president at the time and the guy that was handing out the checks and making arrangements that people knew about that, I think I got exposure, and people then saw that I identified as being a Kiwanian, and so they quite rightly, well, they in my mind they recognize Kiwanis, but I'm the guy that got the award. But it was rather humbling experience knowing that so many others had done so much over their time.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right. So this. Okay. So moving on, let's go to this article about Pietrangelo.
Yes, this article was given to us by Karen Fraser.
Yeah.
And I've read this article over about 3 times now. It's quite involved, but it is very
I
very thorough.
also have to say, and I'm saying this because I'm curious. Is it a bit biased, as in being anti Pietrangelo?
Well, the pointer pointed out, no pun intended there, had pointed out an apparent or a possible conflict of interest Victor Pietrangelo had when he was working with the Stanford Volunteer Fire Department when he got a piece of land at 1/16 its value, that he was the only one that was bid on it, and he was the only one that had an opportunity to buy it. It was and it was outside of Niagara Falls. Basically, it was right at the border of the Stanford, the Fireman's Park there, and it was just inside, I think, the Niagara and the Lake jurisdiction. Nevertheless, it was land that the volunteer fire department had, and he had been working with the volunteer fire department to help sort of save them by connecting them with the
Well, we've talked about that particular land purchase before.
Yeah, so they have a history here. They looked at his that dealing, and it was well, it was deemed to be not inappropriate, but Victor Pietrangelo got in some heavy legal advice. He didn't speak on his own behalf. He had his legal team or lawyer speak on his behalf while it was being investigated.
And one of the things that Vince Carrio said, who councillor at the time, is that we had a very lively debate in camera. And
all right, well, we haven't really even described yet to the audience what this is about.
Yeah.
So this is about a parcel of land that Victor Pietrangelo purchased, him and family members purchased in the location of the new hospital. The new hospital was located, there was a certain amount of land donated for the hospital, but there was determined by the Ontario government that they needed at least 50 acres, not 30 acres of land. So that forced the city to buy another piece of property amounting to about 20 acres.
Yeah.
And they paid a very high premium for that. They paid like the top end money value for that.
I think they paid way over the market value for that. Yeah.
Yes, and that's pointed out in the article that during this whole process, Pietrangelo or his family, or in connection or in combination with his family, had already been owning and buying up property in the area since the 1990s. And and kitty corner to the hospital, the day after the city had decided that they were going to buy this other piece of property for what seems to be an exorbitant amount of money, he purchased a piece of property kitty corner to that hospital for quite a bit less, like only 6% of the value per acre that the other one was. So it's the one right beside the hospital went for an exorbitant amount of money, but he was able to buy another piece of property kitty corner to that right afterwards. So the insinuation here, well, it's not really an insinuation, but it's a question they bring up: how much, how often, and did Victor Pietrangelo remove himself as a person with outside interest, a conflict of interest in this?
Yeah.
And he did sometimes, and he did it not at other times. And then, according to the article, it looks like at critical times he stayed as a voting member of the council at this time, and it looks that he should have recused himself of that vote or participation in the debate.
Okay, so there's a couple of things at play here. I think there's an element of bias in the article because knowing who the author is, I think there's an element that is distinctly anti-Pietrangelo.
Why would you say it? You think somebody's got it in for Pietrangelo, and is it a personal thing, or is it the fact that these people have been keeping an eye on counselors and find this to be questionable?
No, certainly. I think it's important to keep an eye on counsellors and especially look at things that are questionable. There's two things that come into play here, though. One is that at the time when wrongdoing is done, it should be reported to the Integrity Commission right at that point. You've got 90 days from the time of the wrongdoing to report something to the Integrity Commissioner. And I don't believe that was done in this particular instance.
No, but were they aware of it at the time? So that
good question. Or the other alternative is it becomes an election issue, and this has actually had time to be an election issue, and Niagara Falls has said, I don't care.
Well, the problem here is, in this particular case, I'm not so sure that the public was made aware of any of this. They found inconsistencies in his conflict of interest, or alleged inconsistencies of his of his conflict of interest here. He definitely has a lot of interest since the 90s in land in and around that area.
Yeah.
He says, in his own defense, that when questioned about this, he says that he has been in lockstep with the legal advice on this, the city legal advice. The pointer then counters that he could have had all the legal advice that he wanted, but in the end, it was up to him to make the decision at different points to declare conflict of interest. Now, his family and him definitely have a lot of interest in and around that area. And the moment by which the land was purchased, along with the other $20 million or the other 20 acres that were purchased at a very high rate of money, just kitty corner to his, would make that soon as that purchase was made, for the hospital, his land would go way up. So he bought it the day after and had been pursuing that piece of property for some time, according to their investigations. They seem to have done a very, very thorough investigation. They claim to have gone over many videos and other documents or whatever they have researched, and found out that this was very inconsistent.
Yeah.
They're not saying that he did anything wrong. They're just saying that this appears to be a possible conflict of interest, and had enough evidence to back that. So basically, by pointing this out, they're doing their job, really, is pointing this out. To be able to do it within 90 days, you have to know that it had been done. If you're doing research subsequent to that, and you look at you come up with something, you say, well, that piece of property that was beside the hospital sold for an incredible amount of money, and a counselor who already had property in the area and family had property in the area was able to buy a piece of property for a very 13.4 acres of property for much, much less than, it was like within a stone's throw of his own property. So there is some, I don't know, he's just either a very astute business person and was able to pick this up without the landowner realizing that land would be much more valuable the day after council approved the purchase of that 20 acres of land. So do we have, so there are things here that should be investigated. Go ahead.
It's using, and this is actually, this isn't necessarily an accusation about Pietrangelo or anybody else, but it's an accusation that has been laid before in relation to Niagara Falls City Council, and not and other councils as well, by the way, is that, of course, when we look at the agenda for, let's say, next week's city council, if there was a city council meeting next week, we're looking at it with a week's notice, but the people on council, especially if you're involved in the planning committee, will know about questions of land deals potentially a year in advance of when they're actually up at the council meeting.
Yeah, so they're privy to more information than the average.
More information. So to misuse that information, which is what my point is, to use that information in order to buy plots of land, etc., for your own benefit, is a relatively simple thing to do.
Yes,
arguably.
Now he's pointing out that the land kitty corner that was purchased after it was approved by council to buy the property beside the hospital for a whole lot of money, that 20 acres, he was able to buy this particular land, kitty corner to the hospital, for 6%. The per acre cost the taxpayers would have to pay for the property just 50 meters away. So there's a couple different things there. Why did we overpay for that particular piece of land?
Yeah,
such a huge price. Now you could just on that alone, without Pietrangelo being involved, just say somebody was able to buy a land 50 meters away for 6% of the value of the property that the city did. So did the city, on the first level, did the city do its investigations well enough? It used the price that they paid from a valuation that came from people who owned the land, and used that valuation that they had derived from somebody who was working with them. So the city went ahead and just paid that money. Yeah. And was that the right thing to do? Didn't they see that they were being duped a bit here?
Well, and again,
when the land just 50 meters away was 1/6 or only 6% the value. Yeah. And then the other, then after that, then you bring in Pietrangelo, because he then is the guy that took advantage of this particular deal. So first of all, why did the city pay such an exorbitant amount of money for that property when just 50 meters away, it's only 6% the cost? Yeah. So that's the number one thing. The second thing is, then you can investigate the inside information that Victor Pietrangelo may have used. Now he's either a very astute businessman and purchaser.
Again, here's a question that I have to actually put out there is, first of all, the city, and any city in the country, has a certain amount of statutory powers that they can use if necessary to buy land, and they have done so. There's certain things that they can do to actually so they're not paying massive amounts out of the purse. But again, other than buying that land for the hospital, that land is not available. It's zoned agriculture. So other than buying that land for the hospital, there's only one buyer involved in it. And I seem to think to myself that if that buyer wants to buy it for $300,000 rather than $1 million, they're just going to keep offering $300,000. It's what I would do if I was interested in that plot of land and I'd valued it as $300,000. I'm not going to pay $1 million for it just because you think it's you the seller think that I should pay $1 million for it.
Well, the city's hands were tied. Of course, they had the donation of the original 30 acres, and that all looked very good. But when somebody must have known that they're going to need more. They're going to need 20 acres more. Well, whoever owned the property beside them knows that now they can hold out because the city absolutely needed that 20 acres. So you could say that the city was being, driven into this position where they had no other choice but to buy this very high value piece of property because the owner wasn't going to let it go. But the other option the city had was to expropriate that land based on,
exactly.
and then base it on real valuation. So there is a bunch of different things going on here, and I'll thank Karen Fraser again for the article. So there are a lot of questions involved here, but the primary part of the article is that Councillor Pietrangelo and his family had been investing in that area and pursuing this particular piece of property 3 or 4 different times, and the possibility of if he full well knew that this was going to be a very valuable piece of property, and he managed to make the purchase for 6% of the value, 50 meters away from land beside the hospital, in the same state as the land beside the hospital that had to be purchased for the hospital, for very much less. So if the seller of that particular piece of property knew that 20 acres would have to be sold for a whole lot more money, since it was the day after I think his family purchased it. So so there are certain things that really should be questioned, and Pietrangelo himself has said that he pursued legal advice the whole way down the line, but because of the spotty record of sometimes claiming conflict of interest and others not, it was clearly he should have, it seems, to have done a conflict of interest from the very beginning, because his family already owned land in and around there, and full well knowing that once the hospital was planned for that area, the values of the land would go way up. So he should have recused himself of any discussion of the hospital. So it seems in the article is indicating that, because the family had owned, an extended family had owned property in and around the area, and once a hospital goes in there, and services have to be extended out that far, then the value would rocket up.
Well, yeah, exactly, because you're dealing with a plot of land that's in an area that has a few acres, and up until the point about the hospital, irrespective of whether that hospital is whether that land is getting used as a part of the hospital, there's now services on a road that didn't have services before.
Yeah. So and the fact that hospitals going up there would just explode, and that value
demand for it as well. Yeah.
So there's a strong argument to be made that he should have not involved himself in any discussions of that hospital from the very beginning, because of land value. And then to add on top of that, the purchase of 13.4 acres for 6% of the price of a piece of property that's 50 meters away and in the very same condition. So that opens up a whole bag of worms here. Now he claims to have had complete legal advice, and I don't doubt that he was able to do what he did, or felt that he was able to do what he did with the advice that he had, because he seems to be a pretty careful guy. But when you add that to the Stanford volunteer firefighters and them sort of giving him selling him a piece of property 1/16 the value, when he was working with Stanford to amalgamate the park in the city parks and relieve them of the burden of financing that park. I mean, it was good for Stamp, but the award that they gave him, I mean, that sounds a little fishy, even though he was able to.
The Stanford property, I don't know if you've ever gone. I've done it once. I went to, you go to right to the end of Dorchester Road, so you cross Mountain Road, and you continue down the hill beyond where Fireman's Park entrance is, and across the railway line. there's actually, you're in Niagara on the Lake at that stage, but at a certain point you end where the, you know, you're a few 100 meters or so, maybe 200 meters from the highway. The point is that land there is still part of Fireman's Park. And when you get to the highway, in fact, you become, on the other side of the highway is Niagara on the Lake, and then you're only a few hundred meters from a main road.
Yeah.
And the question is that if ever anybody wanted to extend Dorchester, that land that Pietrangelo owns is valuable there.
Well, yeah. He got a what was otherwise a road allowance or something like that. Yeah. And it says it's like an unusable piece of property and everything, but because he owns the road allowance area, if anyone wanted to develop in there, they'd have to go through him. That's the argument that people said. Now, this is what Victor Pietrangelo, Councillor Pietrangelo, has said. This is a quote when members of the Pointer group here asked him, "It's quite evident that neither myself nor the group that you're asking these questions on behalf of have chosen to seek any legal opinion," the councillor said in an emailed response. "This is unfortunate, as I would have envisioned that anyone with character would want to ensure that they were correct in their assumptions prior to deciding to publicly criticize another." Good point. So they haven't sought a legal opinion, or, well, of course, that costs money and stuff. So let me read it again. This is quite evident that neither myself nor the group that you're asking these questions on behalf of have chosen to seek any legal opinion.
Yeah.
This is unfortunate, as I would have envisioned anyone with character would want to ensure that they were correct in their assumptions prior to deciding to publicly criticize other. Are they making assumptions, though? They're pointing this out. They're pointing out this irregularity of his conflict of interest positions on this matter. So they haven't really made an accusation, I don't think. They just correct in their assumptions. I'm not so sure they're making assumptions, but they are. You could say that they are between the lines making assumptions, and the idea that unfortunate as I would have envisioned, and that anyone with character would allow. So this is not a good way for.
It's a poor comment insofar as impugning person's character.
Yeah, imputing person's character, which makes he is making the assumption that they're making assumptions to against his character. So no reporter ever asks goes into the details of legal opinions when they come across something that doesn't really appear exactly correct. So any reporter could have asked that question, and they would not have been rebuffed with, "Have you sought a legal opinion?" Because reporters have to be on topic. Now, legal opinion, that costs money and it takes time. So they're just asking them right out. Maybe the legal opinion will come next.
And actually, in terms of legal opinion, I'm not entirely sure as to where the law is in relation to some of these, but I would certainly be looking at the conflict of interest parts of the Municipal Act. In fact, there's a Municipal Conflict of Interest Act that would be quite important there, and that that is something. Whilst this article points out about the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act,
Yes, yeah,
because it talks about Section 5.1 as if an elected official has a pecuniary interest in an issue being considered, then they must declare it, right?
yeah. It's
Refrain-
also
yeah.
it also goes on to spell out examples that the pointers contends that are similar, where the Ontario, where the judgment was against the of counselors in previous cases, where it was deemed inappropriate.
However,
Distinction.
let me also make one thing. Just because Section 5.1 of the MCIA states whatever it states, right? You also have to understand what case law applies in this particular case, because it's the case law that matters. Because if there is case law about this particular section, that will help you further understand how those particular rules are applied in law.
Yes. So, but that kind of investigation by a
it's not the sort of thing that a journalist is easily capable of doing. No,
that's right. And their objective is to point these things out. They did a lot of research. Now, if you want to accuse the pointer of taking an askewed look, then you would have to say, well, they pointed this out, but did not point out this, or this. So they cherry picked their data. That might be an accusation that Pietrangelo may hurl back at them. But here's kind of interesting. In May 2017 meeting, Mike Strange rose to comments on the effects of a newly announced hospital site. He made the point of identifying himself as a real estate agent in the preamble to his comments, and then went on to say, in part, we're getting an unbelievable hospital on this land. We're going to see that ripple effect with the hospital being built there, the ripple effect of not only residential but commercial along that highway corridor to Niagara Falls is growing and growing. You're going to see that side of Niagara Falls just grow dramatically. So this is even the city council, other city councilors realized, in particular Strange, who has history in real estate, could see that whole place exploding in value.
Yeah, and he's actually that's an important word to what he just said there, because he's commenting upon how important that entire thing is, because you're developing a hitherto undeveloped area to put something major and brand new into it, and that changes the whole dynamic for that area. And so he's what he's saying is quite true, right? It changes the whole dynamic of that area, and that's something that, as a realtor, he's going to profit from.
Well, also too, but he's pointed out to everyone that how much more valuable that property is going to be. And when you have in the area, the Pietrangelo family owns a lot of property there, plots of more than 75 acres, all of which were 750 meters from the new hospital. The Search of Real Estate database showed that the family has been accumulating land in the area since at least 1990s, well before any talk of a hospital being built. So that's an argument for Pietrangelo to point out, well, we've invested in that area long before we knew a hospital was coming at that point.
Yeah.
But that does not negate that under the MCIA, Pietrangelo has pecuniary financial interest, and he should have consistently been declaring conflict when excusing himself from any discussion matter. Well, this is very clear.
Okay.
The Pietrangelo family definitely had been investing in that area. So when a hospital goes into that area, it spikes the value of the property. So he should have recused himself of any discussion of that when knowing that within 750 meters of this hospital, his family owned property and has had property. So that.
And okay, so if they own property since the 90s, I agree that there is no way that the family knew that there was going to be a hospital in that area since the 1990s. Probably the best they could hope for since the 1990s was the expansion of that golf course around the corner.
No, I think it was just they viewed the area as potential, great potential, and it did. But once they started discussing the hospital, the article claims with some validity that he should have recused himself of any
discussion of that.
Discussions because his family already owned there.
Okay, so I live in the area, and most people know of Bridge and Victoria. So if I'm on council and I'm hearing about new developments, let's say in the Bridge and Victoria area, should I be declaring an interest even months and months beforehand?
Not the same thing, Peter. Bad example.
Yeah,
these are lands that were purchased.
But if I bought
for the family for valuation, basically, it was an investment. And when
okay, so if I went out and bought half the Cyanamid land on a speculative land purchase, on the thinking that, hey, in the future there's always going to be some rise, and I was on city council, would I be, when certain things came along, would I be in a conflict?
Yeah, you would be.
Yeah,
I would say if you bought where you live now, or well, let's just say you bought that property and with speculation in mind, and then suddenly your dreams come true because they're going to build a hospital there and the land values will spike up huge, then you should be recusing yourself from any discussion of that hospital and purchase of those land.
I agree. But again, the mere fact that 20 years ago, let's say I bought the former Cyanamid site off of Cyanamid, not knowing how poisoned it was and putting aside the poison issue, right? And
that's irrelevant to this discussion.
If I bought that land n number of years ago and we're just sitting on it, which one could arguably say that's a dumb thing to do anyway, that you're not making a profit in the short term anyway, not unless you're actually using a profit.
No, it's not a dumb thing. People speculate like that a lot.
They do. Yeah. Well, and especially if you could buy said land at, let's say, a quarter of the price it might well otherwise be going for, that might well be seen as actually a very, very smart move.
Well, let's say you bought, you had a lot of land close to where the sewage treatment plant is now, right? And it stinks there quite often. Yeah. So you bought the land cheap. But you're on a city council and you know that they're going to raise that and that's going to disappear and the sewage plant's going to move somewhere else. Well, once that starts to be determined, then you cannot vote on anything issues regarding that, because now your land value is going to go up, and just the fact of having the land area there. I think Lori Lococo, for one, stays away from anything that has to do with downtown because they have a home there or something like that, or your home is close by. It's very simple things like that. I've seen Pietrangelo claim conflict of interest when it has something to do with a school at one time, I think, because he was employed by the school. So definitely there is stuff here that has to be investigated. And the only thing I would say, I don't think the pointer is after any particular councillor at all, but it's what they feel is their job to point these things out. and have Pietrangelo answer them appropriately, as he did with the piece of property that he got from the Stanford Volunteer Fire Department's piece of land that he got from there. He was exonerated in that particular case, but whether or not this is the same, who knows? So it's a very good point, and I think has to do with, I think as far as Pietrangelo goes, trying to ensue that the character of the people who were asking the questions were of people of lack of character. That does not fit well. I think that there's more anger in that response than
there's a bit of mudslinging there. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, because they did not come out and accuse him of that. They just said that it was highly irregular in their view, that this conflict of interest was not from the very beginning issued.
Okay, so it says, okay, Mike is saying we're missing the history here. Wayne Thompson got beaten up by Pietrangelo because of his land. A fish, and Karen's saying a fish. Originally, the city bought enough land for the hospital. Years later, the province said the hospital needed more parking, and so that's why they bought the second piece of land at a high price.
Oh, wow. That's one hell of a costly parking lot.
It is. The next one is, you guys are missing the history. Wayne Thompson beat up the Pietrangelo because of this land. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to take a balanced view of this, as best I can, and I do remember that Wayne Thompson had that. That was definitely dodgy. That Wayne Thompson thing, very dodgy. And
okay, that quote that you,
as a matter of fact, Wayne Thompson had to resign because of it.
Yeah, that quote, by the way, about the lawyer. It was clear because Pietrangelo, Karen's saying, is he saying that in the quote that he has not spoken to a lawyer, right? Because
he is. No, he's not saying that. He says that he hasn't sought a legal opinion, and that the pointer hasn't sought one either. So I don't know. I don't understand why he said that, but his accusation, of course, or his implied accusation is that the people with low character are slinging this without going after a legal opinion. Yeah. That's not how journalism works. They did a very, very complete and thorough investigation. So they say what an unbiased third-party observer should do is to look at that and see what facts they included and what facts they didn't include. Because we're very used to that in the agenda-driven news we have these days, that it's all cherry picking. But this seems to be a very thorough investigation, and it may need to be pursued legally afterwards. But with the resources of newspapers or the media to go and then get a legal opinion, that would be very costly. They're just asking the questions first to see what kind of answers.
Well, in fact, actually, if you think about it, what typically happens when a journalist or newspaper, etc., has a news item that they think is potentially, a legal bomb, they will. It doesn't stop the journalist doing the investigation. Usually what will happen is they will then take that article to the legal team and say, go or no go, just ask them the question.
Excuse me, I'm going to answer you back.
That's okay. You know what I mean? So usually it's the duty of the journalist to write the article. It would then be upon the lawyers to approve or suggest alternatives to the
article. First of all, they do the investigation, and then they go to their editor and say, what are the weaknesses and strengths of this article? Could we publish it as is? And obviously, there's nothing in this article that immediately accuses Pietrangelo of any of this, but it points out the potential of that. Now, the bounce back that Pietrangelo gave is to slur the character of the newspaper, and that's not a really good answer, but I can understand him being angry and saying something like that. Well,
or the journalist.
yeah,
And in this case, the journalist, even though it was pointed in the pointer, the journalist has local ties.
yeah, of course. Well, the journalist said in Niagara Falls Review have local ties. Now so that I don't think that means much at all one way or another. But the fact is that journalism is supposed to be that. They're supposed to be the watchdog for us in many cases. Now, did the pointer do a fair enough assessment of the fact? Okay. Now, it seems to me that they've done a very thorough look at what's going on there and are asking questions that they should ask. And Pietrangelo could exonerate himself, but Pietrangelo has answered that you didn't get a legal opinion. You shouldn't be doing what you're doing. That's kind of irresponsible, and that reflects your character. No, it isn't. They're doing what they're doing. Now, it would take a third party to kind of overview the research that the pointer did to see if they've included everything that need to be done, pro and con, from Pietrangelo to the pointer's reporters and all that.
Yeah.
So we'll see if anything happens of this, but it would take some effort now to pursue Pietrangelo, and get some kind of a judgment there. But based on the examples that the pointer has pointed out has happened in the past, it is worth pursuing.
Yeah, there was a case, because so what they're basically saying, there was a case back in 1985 about this type of thing, and basically the MC, because of a breach of the MCIA, a councillor's seat was vacated in fairly similar circumstances because of a land deal.
Now, Pietrangelo should have been extremely careful with this, full well knowing that his family had property, and it was 750 meters from within 750 meters of the proposed site. It seems to me that he should never have involved in any discussion or any vote regarding that, because of his family's connection, and because even his co-counselor, basically, and his colleague on council, Strange, said that was going to be very much a whole lot of value added to that area when the hospital went there.
Yeah.
So,
well, the other question though is about this, that the ones that are opposite, the ones in the block, he's got 5 parcels of land here. Right, one, the kitty corner one, which is
not just him, but him and or his extended family.
Okay. We're talking about 5 parcels of land here. One further down the road, further down it's Bowen's Lane, isn't it? That one there. Further down the road, where there's actually like a housing plot with an extended garden. One behind there, which is farmyards, etc., which is quite a bit of acreage. And then another farm plot in that same block. But the key one there is the kitty corner one, which is diagonally opposite the hospital.
Yeah. So basically, that was the recent purchase, but all the other purchases were prior to that. Now, and as soon as the hospital was announced to be there, the assumptions are that he should never have taken any part in the discussions on that or any votes to deal with that area, because obviously he had a potential conflict of interest because of his family's land value there. When that hospital was voted and the property beside it had to be purchased, that elevated the land value that he and his family would have had, obviously. So he should have recused himself of any vote or discussion on that, because it was a definite conflict of interest. So says the pointer.
Yeah.
That's their point.
Yeah. Yeah. And the question here is, it's up for the people in the city really ultimately to decide, right? I think, to be quite honest, had it not been for the kiddie corner stuff, the other plots of land, certainly. Well, the one
that makes it definite, because they had pieces of property there as speculative properties. As soon as they have those properties there and their land was then going to be elevated in price, obviously, if a hospital goes there, then you stay out of that discussion, particularly when councillors declare conflict of interest for much less of a conflict.
Yeah.
So it seems to me, on that basis alone, the pointers really does have something there. Right from the very beginning, he should have removed himself from any discussions. That is their point. Now, whether or not the pointer is leaving out pertinent information that would exonerate Pietrangelo on this, who knows? But judging by his response, he's not too happy. And you got to, and if anyone has ever been accused or of stuff that they didn't do, you know how angry that makes you. I remember when I was part of the union. Yeah, I remember being part of the union and being accused of using my position in the union to further my, my ability to get jobs, good jobs, and stuff like that.
Okay, but
and that was true.
But I'm going to put the other side, because it says here also, numerous times Pietrangelo declared a conflict of interest on issues such as hospital construction, including additional floors to the hospital, road widening, sanitary sewer improvements, potential for residential and community developments near the hospital on his lands, right?
Well, we said from the very beginning, it was an inconsistent conflict of interest.
Yeah.
Sometimes he did, sometimes he didn't.
Yeah. Right. But the point being, it's about there have been times, but not all the time, is what I think where the article is really going. And the question is, you're right insofar as when you look at Laurie Lococo, Laurie kind of almost declares a conflict of interest. I heard I was looking at a council and she declared a conflict of interest and went out the room because it was related to some project that was intended to happen downtown. It was about a mile away from her house.
Yeah, so she's very careful. And let's say the city has decided they're going to widen the road and plant trees. Whether or not they're going to do that, and their property has to be close by, and it may elevate the price of her property, then of course you walk out. So, but other people may say, well, that really doesn't have much to do. They were going to do it or not. If I vote for it or not vote for it, I'm voting for my neighbors on, so there are, so the idea that this is sort of set in stone. The ultimate decision, it says in the article, the ultimate decision has to be with the counselor, no matter how much legal advice they get. So there's nothing that firmly says that you cannot, that you have to do a conflict of interest, and the guidelines for that seem to be, there are kind of rubbery on the edges.
The other question, of course, is that when there was in-camera meetings, discussions about said property of land, was Pietrangelo, did he declare a conflict at that point, and did he leave the meeting?
Yeah, he shouldn't have been part of it.
He shouldn't have been part of it.
Yeah.
That's because in the closed meeting, and by the way, just so that everybody's aware, purchases of land.
It says here, right here, Matz has stated that the in-camera meetings from 2017 meeting indicated that Pietrangelo had declared conflict of interest during the session and subsequently left the room. When asked to allow the pointer to review the attendance section of the minutes, Matson declined, explaining in-camera minutes are not accessible to the public. So regardless of Matson's actions, the responsibility lies with the counselor to properly declare all conflicts of interest in accordance with the MCIA. They are obligated to ensure that their conflicts are declared and accurately recorded.
Yeah, I think a conflict of interest, obviously a purchase of land by the city is one issue, which is actually has to be, at least initially, has to be discussed in camera. It cannot be discussed at early stages in a public meeting. They can put it they have to put it finally to the council when they purchase the land, but it has to be discussed in camera at first. That's one of the few rules about in-camera meetings. So again, had the conflict, Pietrangelo should not, however, have been involved in said discussions.
Well, here's another issue, that the conflict of interest has to be clearly declared.
Yes,
which is an issue that the pointer points out, and that they weren't. He just said that I have a conflict of interest in the area. So Randy in Chippewa says any journalist will ask. It is the response that usually drives an investigation onwards. Exactly. Victor will find himself having to answer questions that our counsel is used to being clear of while in counsel. However, this is his personal, with crosshairs in the way.
Yeah.
Crossfires in the way. Sorry, crossfires in the way.
Yeah. This is, it's a tough question.
Well, basically, I think the pointer did what they're supposed to do as journalism. Whether they have an issue with Pietrangelo and they have anything personal against them, if they have lack of character, the fact that to be accused of having lack of character, that's not.
But again, the lack of character is relating to the journalist here,
or the outfit that's asking the question. So that
no, I think
that has no relevance. That has no relevance.
I think in this particular case, it's to the individual writing the story.
The individual writing the story is only part of the whole investigation. Obviously, they've had to have more than one person on this to be able to dig into the files and to review the videos, as they said they have done, and to point out that sometimes there's a conflict of interest declared and sometimes not. And in particular, since the family's own property 750 meters from the proposed hospital, at that time proposed hospital, that they would definitely have a conflict of interest that could be stated as such. My family owns property in and around that area, blah, blah, blah. So to be clearly declarative. So these are the points they've pointed out, and they claim to have done all this research. So whether anything goes from this point on,
the trouble is, of course, the minutes of the closed session are not available to the public, so we don't actually know whether Pietrangelo took part in said discussions at all.
Well, one of those things
we only have the the CAO and the town clerk's word for that.
Well, I think that their attendance records could indicate that Pietrangelo walked out of in-camera meetings that discussed this, and it appears that he has walked out on it for a conflict of interest. Whether or not he declared his conflict of interest in a timely manner, or only after it was very clear that the hospital was going to be there, and he has involved himself in discussions about the hospital, participated and voted on those things. And once it was clearly seen to be the case that the hospital was going there, and then he began to call conflict of interest when he should have done it from the very beginning, because his family had property there since the 1990s. So all this have to be cleared out, and so a counter narrative basically will have to come up. If the pointer has enough there to call an investigation into this, we'll find out, I guess. But that takes resources that the pointer may not have.
Yeah. And well, actually, this has been picked up locally as well by the Thorold Today, by the way.
By the Thorold newspaper?
Yeah, by Thorold Today.
Okay, so there you go.
Yeah,
it's gaining traction, so that gives some legitimacy to the pointer's investigation on this. If the Thorold newspaper sees it and sees that it's a worthwhile article to continue, then that gives it some currency.
And by the way, just to point out, of course, is that the Pointer is a newspaper that prides itself on ecological type of research, doesn't it? In looking at local ecologies and the local environment.
Yeah, I also have a feeling that it views itself as a kind of a watchdog.
Possibly, yeah. So I'm saying that because one has to understand the nature of the report we've been discussing over the last hour.
Well, this one has nothing to do with ecology, has it?
Yeah, no, it doesn't.
So, I don't know. I'm very happy that Karen gave us that. When I read it, I had the same idea that you had. Is this somebody that's against Pietrangelo in particular? Do they? I haven't seen that in any of their reports. Sometimes I feel that the pointer has overstated things when I
believe that to be true. But yeah, I believe
in this particular case, I couldn't fault them the way they wrote it. They seem to have had it took them a long time to come up with this, and a great deal of effort. So I think they were very careful with it. So we'll see how it progresses from here. And the fact that it's gained traction with a more sort of a larger newspaper means something, I think,
Yeah. All right. And I think we can kind of call it quits at that point. We've got one more comment. Chris Simone saying, thanks for the dialogue. Let's have a good day, everybody. I agree. All right. So anything further?
No, just without further ado, I bid you adieu. And Gaza, remember Gaza.
Yeah.
Don't forget Gaza, or Ukraine for that matter, but Gaza in particular.
Yeah. Okay. And we'll be coming back to other issues tomorrow, I guess. And remember, this week is foreshortened because Friday is a holiday and we won't be here Monday either.
Yes, and we thank our tireless reporter in the field, Karen Fraser, for giving us this article.
Thank you, Karen, and have a great day, everybody.
Yeah, well, you might have anyway. I'll leave that last comment I had in my mind for now. So see you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.